Hi, this is Rick for EDU Mobile. In this demo, we're going to look at a simple application, a very simple implementation of Model View Controller. We can see that I have a very simple interface. I have a prompt, which is a text view, enter text. I have an input control. This is an edit text control. I then have a button, and I'm getting the text for this button from the strings table. So if I look at the strings table, I can see that in strings XML I have a string named button title, and that string is add. And then in my activity, I can see that string at string / button title. If I look at the text, I can see that in my button I have an attribute called text, and I'm taking it from the string table rather than just putting the string add in there. This is a better way to do it. It promotes localization for our applications for strings, which is something we'll get into a little bit later. I wanted also to mention that we have an on-click handler declared in this button. There are a couple of ways to handle button clicks, and of course we'll cover those a little bit later in the course. But the simplest way I find is just to create a method of our activity and then assign that method name to our on-click handler in the button, so that when this button is clicked, process input, in this case, a method called process input, will fire, and that becomes important a little bit later. Finally, I have a text view, which is my output, and I can see that in my text, again, that text view here has been made editable. I could have used an edit text, but an edit text would have given me this line. All I want to be able to do here is have the user enter a string, click add, and then have that string be appended to whatever text is displayed in this edit text. And I'm going to do that using Model View Controller. So in my main activity, I have instantiated a class called Model, and I just called the default constructor on that class. I have my onCreate method here, which is overridden from activity, and then I have my process input method. So the first thing I want to do is get the input and output controls. The input control is an edit text, and the output control is a text view. And I can do that by using the R class and the find view by ID method of the R class. If we look in the build area under source, I believe, yes, here is the R class. If I look at that R class, I can see that this is just a bunch of declarations of inner classes that have integer IDs for each of our controls. So I have button, input, output, and prompt declared as integers. Okay, so that's the R class. Now the R class is built for us as we generate these IDs in our XML files and strings tables and so forth. So we never edit the R class directly. If you edit the R class, you break your app. So it's just something to look at and be aware that it's there. All right, so now back to our main activity. We've gotten handles, let's say, to our input and output controls, and then we get the text from the input control and tell the model to add it. So the layout XML, activity main XML, is the view. We tell the controller, which is the activity, to get the text from the view and then add it to the model. So here it's simply add the string to the model from the inputs text to string method. So we're taking it from the view here and adding it to the model here. And the controller doesn't really care how the model does it. It's just saying, okay, I know I have a model out there. I know it has an add string method, so I'm just going to tell the model to add this string to the data. And then, conversely, once this model has added the string, I want to get the full list from the model and display it as a string, because again, the text view that I'm going to display this in wants a string. So I set the output text to model.getList, and I'm going to get this as a string, obviously. So I don't care how the model does it, I just want it to do it. And then finally, I set the text on the input control to an empty string. All right, let's look at the model and see how this happens. So again, a good model hides its own implementation. I am implementing this particular model as an array list. It's a generic. Here it's typed as a string. So array list generic T is the superclass here, and I'm just typing it as a generic of type string. And I'm calling it string list, and this is private to the model. In the default constructor, or the no-arg constructor, let's say, I just set the string list to a new array list of type string. Now here's my add string method, very simple. I accept a string and I add it to the list. So string list add and then string. The generic is of type string, so it expects to be adding a string. Finally, the get list returns a string representation of the list separated by spaces. So here I can use string.format to do that. I've set up a variable called retval, return value, as a new string. And then for each string in our string list, I want to string format with a string, space, and a string, my return value, and then a string. So I'm building a space concatenated list of strings from my string list. And then finally, I return my retval, and again, as a string. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. Now, when I run, of course, it's going to take a little bit to initialize. I have a emulator already set up and running. It's going to ask me if I want to use this emulator or start a new one. So after the application has initialized and began to run, I'll come back. So here we are. The app is up, and here is my prompt, which is just a text view. And then let's say I enter the string 1 and click on add, and we can see that it is published out here to this text view. Now if I want to click on, or let's add 2, I get 1, 2. We can see that the model has appended it, and then the controller has asked for this string and gotten it back. And finally, let's say that we add, that's predictable, but we'll add it anyway. And we have 1, 2, 3. Okay, so our app is working, and this is an illustration of the principle of model view controller. Now, in reality, let's say that the controller may just declare a string and use it, but we want to illustrate the principle of model view controller. In a production app, the model, of course, would be much more complex, and it may consist of multiple classes. Also, in a production app, each activity we want to display is really a controller, and each displayed activity would have its own view. And potentially, they could share a model, or all the controllers of an app could share a model, or the model could be broken into various parts. Each activity could have its own model, and there could be another model class that overarched the entire application. So model view controller is not only a way to deal with the pyramid of what happens in an activity with that activity's own data, but also the structure of the entire application. Thank you very much.